Good afternoon, class. Good afternoon, online students as well. When did your batch start off? All right. So we are going to start off with environment and ecology module. Before I get on with the lecture, let me brief you a little about the syllabus. Along with that, the courses, the references which you have to go through for your preparation. The syllabus of environment and ecology can be broadly divided into two parts. First part of the syllabus is going to be conceptual. The conceptual part of the syllabus remains static, more or less static. In the conceptual part of the syllabus, you learn the basic fundamentals of the subject, like what an ecosystem is, what do we mean by the term biodiversity, concepts like ecological productivity, how the ecosystems and the biodiversity are distributed across the planet as biomes, so on and so forth. So under the conceptual part of the syllabus, you introduce yourself to the fundamentals of the subject, which will help you to understand the second part of the syllabus better as well, which is the current affairs. Current affairs as in the contemporary events in the field of environment and ecology, ones which are happening globally as well as ones which are important from India's perspective. So you learn about ecosystems, biodiversity, other fundamentals over here, and then the ecological challenges which affect ecosystems, which affect biodiversity. So the ecological challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, other environmental issues like environmental pollution. These type of themes, they become part of the current affairs. So why are these challenges arising? The reasons for that, what have been initiatives in the past to handle these challenges, and what can be done in the future to take care of them. This becomes part of the current domain of the syllabus. There cannot be a silo-like separation between the conceptual part and the current affairs part. हम जो भी यहाँ पढ़ते हैं, in context of that, whatever happens in the present times being covered by the newspapers, etc., that becomes part of your syllabus as well. This is how broadly the syllabus can be understood into two parts. Now coming on to the references or the sources for your preparation. The class notes and the class lectures, from time to time certain handouts will be provided to you. Some of the handouts in soft copy format, some of them for the offline students in the hard copy format as well will be given. I will keep on briefing you up when you have to go through those handouts. Apart from the class notes and the handouts, like you take up a basic book for every subject, you take a basic NCERT for this subject as well. Class 12, Biology NCERT, not the entire book for my subject. 4 chapters, chapter 13 to chapter 16, right? The last 4 chapters of the book for environment and ecology. Next is going to be current affairs. For current affairs, I presume over here, all of you have started with the reading of your newspaper on a regular basis. The Hindu has a decent coverage of the current affairs of environment and ecology, but if some of you have been focusing upon Indian Express, that's acceptable as well. You can go ahead with reading of the Indian Express as well, right? Apart from the Hindu, I would recommend that you also look up current affairs from the portal, either portal on a daily basis or you go through your recitals. These are the current affair booklets which are provided to you on a monthly basis, right? So you supplement your newspaper reading, daily newspaper reading along with current affairs on the portal, either the portal or the recitals, not both of them. There is a simple reason for it. You at best will be able to cover one newspaper, looking at your classes going on and then revision back home and then managing your optionals, so juggling between multiple sources over here. So you at best can take care of one newspaper, stick to that one newspaper, but if you go through the portal or the recitals, they will have coverage of the current affairs from multiple sources. Probably 3 to 4 newspapers will be covered. Relevant websites like Press Information Bureau, etc. will be covered as well, right? So that is why you keep supplementing reading of the newspaper from the current affairs of the portal. And next is a reference book. This can be yellow book. The institute will provide you a reference book on environment and ecology, which is called as a yellow book. So you'll get a yellow book on environment and ecology. You can go through that. Now, you need not go through this reference book, this one or any other which you are more comfortable with. You need not go through this reference book in entirety. That is, you need not cover this book from cover to cover. You can be little selective about reading through the book. Selective by synchronizing the topics and the themes based upon the current affairs. So let's say you're reading through the newspapers and you find that there are certain themes which are becoming repetitive. Let's say in our country, very recently, cheetah relocation has happened, right? Now this is species translocation. Now there must be a certain backdrop to species translocation, as in why species translocation happens. Are there other countries? Are there previous examples in India when species translocation? Of course, not transcontinental, लेकिन हमारे यहाँ भी from one protected area to another protected area species translocation has happened. So this becomes a historic background to the species translocation undertaken by India recently. Now what you do is, you go through the contents of the book, through the index, right? From the index you find out where is biodiversity conservation discussed in that book. Wherever biodiversity conservation is discussed, the book will surely discuss something related to species translocation as a conservation strategy. So now what you do is that selectively from the book, go to those pages where species translocation has been discussed and go through those topics on a selective basis so that you are able to prune out the topics which are more important for you, filter out the topics which are more important to you, and probably weed out the topics which may not be that much relevant for you, right? Ideally, though, if you can go through the entire book, that's best. That's utopian. But looking at the time pressures you often complain about, this can be another way to go through the book. Get it? Online, ma'am, will there be any special handouts given to the offline student? No, yaar, special handouts will not be given to them. All of you will get the handouts which are very, very special. Just that you will get them in the soft copy mode. These guys will, some of the handouts will be given to them in the hard copy mode. That's the only speciality, yeah? That's all. We are not differentiating between online and offline in that sense. Be assured about it, Varun. Okay. Now, moving on to the nature of the questions in the prelims and the mains examination. In the prelims examination, on an average, you get around 15 questions from environment and ecology. When I say on an average, year-on-year variations will be there, right? So plus minus 3, 4 can happen. Some of the questions are going to be from the static part. The rest of the questions are going to be from the current affairs. Most of the questions are going to be from the current affairs. A few questions will be there from the static part as well, right? So static part means that you must go through your NCERT very, very thoroughly. There is absolutely no compromise which is allowed in reading through the 4 chapters of the NCERT book. You must go through those very carefully. Now coming on to the current affairs. As far as my subject is concerned, and this is exclusively for environment and ecology. For environment and ecology, the questions asked by the examiner in the prelims examination have been from the current affairs of the previous 2 years. Which means that if you are writing your prelims examination next year, 23, the coverage of the current affairs you have to go through is from May, June 21 till April 23. So the previous 24 months. And this is exclusively for my subject, because usually for rest of the subjects, the coverage of the current affairs which you take up are previous 12 months, isn't it? This is a difference over here, and that's why I want to bring it to your notice. There are multiple questions asked by the examiner from the current affairs, but which are backdated current affairs in environment and ecology, and they ask questions from backdated current affairs in your prelims examination. Now, this year's current affairs are more manageable to you because you have started with your preparation now, right? So, theek hai, May, June, or let's say even June, July is what is more manageable since June, July onwards. But what do you do about the current affairs of the previous 12 months? That is last year's 6 months from June to December and this year's first 6 months from January to May. What you can do is, there will always be these current affairs compilation available on the portal. होता क्या है ना, जैसे इस साल prelims हुआ, तो before this year's prelims, there will be this summary of the current affairs, subject-wise summary, environment and ecology summary of the current affairs of last 12 months available on the portal. That's available in the soft copy format, right? So now you can go through those summarized current affairs of the previous 12 months from the portal. That is how you can take care of the current affairs of the last 1 year. From where you started your newspaper reading, you can cover that from the newspapers and the portals, right? That's this year. But the portal summarized current affairs, subject-wise current affairs can also be referred by you for the previous 12 months. Now the mains examination. Mains examination for environment and ecology, some of the questions again from the static part, most of the questions again from the current affairs part. Mains is more manageable. Prelims of environment and ecology is what is more tricky. Mains is more manageable provided you have 3 things in place. You have a thorough understanding of the conceptual part of the syllabus, because the conceptual part of the syllabus helps you to understand the contemporary happenings in a more detailed manner. So you require a thorough understanding of the conceptual part. Along with that, you need to have a good analysis of the contemporary events in the field of environment. And along with that, you need to have decent answer writing skills. Provided you have 3 prerequisites in place: decent answer writing skills, thorough understanding of the contemporary events, and along with that, good understanding of the conceptual part, you can manage your mains examination of environment and ecology in a better manner as compared to prelims. Prelims, I'm not saying you cannot manage. Yes, but prelims becomes more tricky part of the examination, right, for environment and ecology. Alright, as far as our association is concerned, I'll be taking environment and ecology, disaster management, and a few lectures on geography. Let's start off. We begin by revisiting one of the basic terms we did in our school times as well, environment. All of us understand environment refers to our surroundings. When I say our surroundings, I mean the air around us, the water bodies in our vicinity, the other buildings around us. There are trees outside, there are birds which are perching on those trees. So basically our environment, our surroundings, they comprise of certain components. Some of them are living components, some of them are non-living components. From the school days we know the living components are better called as the biotic components and the non-living components are called as the abiotic components. So our surroundings comprise of biotic components, that is the life forms around us. Along with that, abiotic components. The abiotic components are the non-living components of the environment. The abiotic components are the non-living components of the environment. The next is understanding ecosystem. Now class, ecosystem is an entity which is a functional unit. You will understand after some time why do we call it as a functional unit. For the time being, just understand that this ecosystem is an entity. This entity comprises of biotic components, that is the life forms, and it comprises of abiotic components, that is the non-living components. Much like environment, this entity comprises of biotic components and abiotic components. And now in this ecosystem, there are going to be interactions between the biotic components. Interactions in the sense there are going to be some kind of linkages between the biotic components. There are going to be interactions of the biotic components with the abiotic components. So the biotic components will interact with the abiotic components as well. And thirdly, there are going to be interactions between the abiotic components of the ecosystem too. I said three things. That ecosystem will comprise of biotic, abiotic, and there are three kinds of interactions which are existing. Interactions between the biotic components, between the biotic and the abiotic components, and interactions between the abiotic components of the ecosystem as well. Let us try to understand this with the help of an example. And example of an ecosystem which we take up is that of a forest. Now in this forest, there are life forms like plants. There are life forms like plants. There are life forms like animals, lower order animals like insects. There are herbivores, there are carnivores. So plants and animals are the life forms, two broad categories of life forms present in a forest. Now the non-living components. The non-living components of the forest include the gaseous mixture of atmosphere, that is the air, the water resources of the forest, maybe surface water resource like a river, maybe a subsurface water resource like a groundwater aquifer, right? The next is non-living components also include nutrients in the soil. Non-living components also include nutrients in the soil, and along with that it includes the landforms as well. It includes the landforms as well. Online, somebody asks me, ma'am, will you give us dictation or should we take running notes? I'll give you dictation, but I want you to jot this down. इसीलिए मैंने कुछ बोला नहीं. I knew you were writing down. I want you to write down what I am explaining on the board. हालांकि I'll give the dictation, but dictation is going to be a very crisp or a very summarized dictation. So when the explanations they go on the board, you keep on taking your running notes as well, right? So बच्चे, now the non-living components, they include the gaseous mixture of atmosphere, the water resources, the nutrients present in the soil, and the landforms. And now I say that in an ecosystem there are going to be interactions between all of these components. So let us think about what are the possible interactions. A few of them, not the exhaustive list, but a few of them. The plants, they will take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the soil, and they will take up nutrients from the soil, and in the presence of sunlight they will do the photosynthesis. This is a kind of interaction existing between the biotic components of the forest and the abiotic components of the forest. Now the plants have become dependent upon various environmental or the abiotic components which are existing in the forest for their survival, right? The animals are going to be dependent upon the landforms as a place of their habitat, that is where they live. They will also require water for their survival and oxygen for their respiration. Again, an example of interaction existing between biotic component and the abiotic components. When the plants they prepare the food, the animals are going to be directly or indirectly dependent upon the food which is produced by the plants. The herbivores are going to be directly dependent and the carnivores are going to be indirectly dependent. Now animals also over here include lower order animals like insects, bees, butterflies, etc. Now when these bees and butterflies they feed upon the nectar of the flowers, during that process they will help in pollination. This means that there is a two-way relationship. Insects are helping in pollination of the plants and the plants are providing food for survival of animals. So it's a two-way relationship, and that's why a double-edged arrow everywhere. Everywhere it's going to be a double-edged arrow because everywhere there are two-way relationships which are existing between these components. And now the interactions at the third level between the abiotic components themselves. The water resources in the forest. Can I say that the water resources of the forest will be a function of the amount and the type of rainfall which the forest receives? And the rainfall which a region receives may in turn be dependent on the type of landforms which are present in a region. From the school days, do you remember something called as relief rainfall or orographic rainfall? Yes. Imagine that there is a mountain range running through the forest. And there are moisture-laden winds or rain-bearing clouds which are traveling in this direction. Now the face of the mountain or the hill of the mountain where this particular rain-bearing winds are directly incident upon, this receives very heavy rainfall. And the opposite side receives lesser rainfall. The one which receives heavy rainfall from the school times we know that's called as the windward side, and the opposite one is the leeward or the rain shadow region. Point over here that the water resources of the forest may in turn be dependent on the landforms which are present in the forest, and therefore there are definitely certain relationships which are existing between the abiotic components of the forest as well, right? Now when we try to analyze forest as a sum total of all these components, biotic components, abiotic components, and because of the interactions which are existing between all these components, this forest has become a life-supporting entity. This forest has become a self-sustaining entity. Self-sustaining in the sense that for millions of years, these forests have been able to support life. Any such entity which comprises of biotic, abiotic components with interactions between these components and such that it is supporting life is called as an ecosystem. So this is what is meant by an ecosystem. अब लिखेंगे, write down. An ecosystem is defined as a functional unit composed of a biotic community, integrated with its physical non-living environment through the flow of energy and flow of nutrients. Through the flow of energy and flow of nutrients. Next para. The concept of ecosystem was given by an ecologist A.G. Tansley, in 1935. Ecologist A.G. Tansley in 1935. Next para. An ecosystem can have varying levels of complexity. Varying, V-A-R-Y, different. Varying levels of complexity. Comma. It can be either terrestrial or aquatic. And it can be either natural or human managed. ब्रैकेट्स में लिखेंगे, that is artificial. That is artificial. Human managed, that is artificial. Now understand, class. Now class, this ecosystem is a pretty flexible concept. This ecosystem can be small in size, it could be big in size. I took the example of forest. Forests are usually big in size. But let's say there is a small pond of water. There is some algae which is doing photosynthesis over there. Some small fishes which are feeding upon that algae. Some water birds which are feeding upon those fishes. Now there are biotic, abiotic components in that pond of water. Life is supported in that pond of water because of the interactions between the biotic, abiotic components. So this becomes an ecosystem as well, because this pond of water is now sustaining life. It is supporting life, but it is small. It is a simple one. It will not have many complex interactions, right? Then this ecosystem could be either land-based, that is terrestrial. Forest, grassland, these are examples of land-based ecosystems. Some of them will be very enriched ecosystems like forest. We for sure know that they have many species, but deserts are also terrestrial ecosystems. They don't have those many species, but still they are ecosystems because life is supported over the deserts as well, right? And now these ecosystems could be aquatic as well, water-based. Oceans are aquatic ecosystem. They are the biggest ecosystem we have because oceans, they do what? They cover 70% of the earth's surface. Rivers are aquatic in nature. Ponds, lakes, wetlands, these are aquatic in nature, right? So this ecosystem again could be terrestrial or could be aquatic. And the next is that this ecosystem could be natural. All the examples which I gave to you till now are the examples of natural ecosystems, but these ecosystems could be managed by humans as well, and then we call them as artificial. A classic example of an artificial ecosystem what we have is the agricultural fields which we have and the gardens which we have in our homes. The agricultural fields. Now over there we have a specific objective. We want to maximize the crop yield, right? So what do? We prepare the field, we plow the soil, we apply irrigation waters, we go for sowing of the selective crops which we want with the selective seeds which are high yielding variety seeds. We will apply fertilizers, we will apply pesticides. We are modifying the conditions to a large extent. But we are not pumping life over there in that agricultural field. Life is supported. Now there may be a lot of biodiversity in the soils, lot of insects like earthworms, etc. present in the soils of the agriculture field. So now this agriculture field is becoming a life supporting entity. There are plants which are growing, there are insects, there are birds which are feeding upon the grains, there are some other pest weeds which are coming up. We are trying to remove them. So life is supported over that agriculture field. But this is an example of an artificial ecosystem because life is modified by humans to a large extent. Another example of an artificial, I said, the gardens which we have in our homes. Again, we know for sure that there are a lot of insects which are supported. Earthworms ho gaye, millipedes ho gaye, termites ho gaye, butterflies ho gaye, which are supported. Birds may be perching over there, right? Bees may be supported by that garden. Yes, but we modify the conditions. We may cut the grass from time to time, prune the branches of the flowers from time to time. So, bache, this again becomes an example of an artificial ecosystem. So now ecosystem becomes a pretty flexible concept depending upon the purpose of the study. Could be small, could be big, could be terrestrial, could be aquatic, could also be artificial or humans. But when I take the sum total of all these ecosystems over the planet, summation of all of them, what do I get? I get entire planet, isn't it? And now this means that our planet itself is an ecosystem. And our planet is the largest known ecosystem to us. Now class, in the first lecture itself, you are appreciating planet as an ecosystem. You are appreciating Earth as an ecosystem because you for sure know that there are a number of environmental problems today which we are faced with. Climate change, biodiversity loss, soil erosion चल रहा है, land degradation चल रहा है, water aquatic pollution चल रहा है, the oceans have a huge amount of plastic debris. So there are a lot of environmental problems for which now environmental solutions, environmental management, conservation, protection, all this becomes imperative. And that is probably, you have this as part of your syllabus, because as future policy makers of the country, administrators of the country, what are you supposed to be doing? You're supposed to be formulating the policies for environmental management and at the same time executing those policies. But if the solutions are to be found out to these environmental challenges, it must be a scientific approach. It must be a science-based approach to these environmental challenges, right? And bache, this ecosystems-based approach gives us a science-based approach to find the challenges to the environmental issues, right? Now, every ecosystem, this ecosystem, irrespective of what type of ecosystem it is, every ecosystem will have some basic properties. Let us understand what are the basic properties of this ecosystem. Take your next heading, characteristics of an ecosystem. Characteristics of an ecosystem. I'll take up questions once I'm through with certain part of the topic. Who is this? I'll take up doubts after some time. Let me be through with some content. The first is structure of an ecosystem. Structure of an ecosystem, and the next is functions of an ecosystem. Structure of an ecosystem and functions of an ecosystem. Likhiye, structure of an ecosystem is defined as hierarchical arrangement of biotic components of an ecosystem. Hierarchical arrangement of biotic components of an ecosystem. It is better called as, continue, it is better called as trophic structure of an ecosystem. Better called as trophic structure of an ecosystem. Now understand, class. Now when we talk about the structure, structure is only with respect to the biotic components. Abiotic components are not included in the structure, right? And by structure we mean that these biotic components will be arranged into a hierarchy, into some order. Hierarchy means a scale. There are going to be some lower order organisms, some higher order biotic components. And what is the basis of this organization? The basis of this organization is feeding relationships, which means who eats whom. Kaun kisko khata hai. And we get to know the feeding relationships of an ecosystem from the food chains and the food webs we have in the ecosystem. Now in a forest, what is the simple food chain which may be existing? There are plants. Plants are eaten by the herbivores like rabbit, deer, etc. The herbivores in turn are eaten by the carnivores. And these carnivores, imagine there is a tiger and the tiger dies. And now the dead remains of the tiger are fed upon by scavengers like vultures and hawks. Right? So these carnivores in turn may be fed upon by scavengers. This becomes a very simple food chain of an ecosystem, and now this food chain, I am arranging the biotic components based upon the feeding relationship, because the food chain now is telling me about the feeding relationships. So this trophic structure will now be depicted in the form of a tapered pyramid. At the base we have the producers, because the producers, they are producing their own food. We also call them as autotrophs. Producers are making their own food, producing their own food, so we also call them as autotrophs. So plants are the producers or the autotrophs which are present at the first trophic level of an ecosystem. Now there are herbivores. The herbivores, they feed upon the plants. So herbivores, they start occupying the second trophic level. Herbivores are called as the primary consumers. Now these primary consumers will be fed upon by secondary consumers, which are the carnivores like tiger, lion, etc. They occupy the third trophic level. And now the top carnivores, I gave you the examples as scavengers. So the top carnivores are the tertiary consumers, which occupy the fourth trophic level. Every ecosystem will have these kind of food chains. Every ecosystem will have these kind of feeding relationship. Based upon the feeding relationship, now when we have organized them into a hierarchy, we get the trophic structure of an ecosystem. This is going to be one of the characteristic features of every ecosystem. The next characteristic feature I said are the functions of an ecosystem, and every ecosystem will perform two functions. Flow of energy is one of the functions performed by the ecosystems, and flow of nutrients is another function performed by these ecosystems. Flow of energy and flow of nutrients, these are the two functions which are performed by every ecosystem. We take up the flow of energy first. We first understand the flow of energy. Class, what is the fundamental source of energy over the planet? So solar energy remains fundamental source of energy for the ecosystems as well. This solar energy during the process of photosynthesis will be converted into chemical energy of the organic compounds. Right? Will be converted into chemical energy of the organic compounds. That is, plants are the organic compounds. So now the solar energy is converted into chemical energy. Now energy has reached the ecosystem. It is at the first trophic level of the ecosystem. From here on, the flow of energy will begin. When the herbivores, they feed upon the plants, energy goes to the second trophic level. When the carnivores, they feed upon the herbivores, energy goes on to the third trophic level. When the top carnivores, they feed upon the carnivores, energy moves on to the fourth trophic level. This is simple, right? But class, this flow of energy, like any other flow of energy happens in nature, it will be governed by the two fundamental laws of thermodynamics. And now we try to recollect those two fundamental laws of thermodynamics here. What did the first law says? Energy can neither be created. So what basically happens over here is solar energy is converted into chemical energy, and then the chemical energy is transferred in a unidirectional manner from the lower trophic level to the higher trophic level. That is, the energy transfer will never happen in the reverse direction. Energy transfer will always happen in a unidirectional way. मतलब ऐसा तो कभी नहीं होगा ना फॉरेस्ट में कि आज जंगल में डियर ने टाइगर को खा लिया था, ऐसा नहीं होगा. We know that, right? So that's why I said that energy flow always happens unidirectionally. Now the second law is more pertinent over here. अब second law कहता है कि यार whenever work is done, it can never be 100% efficient. That is, whenever energy is converted from one form to another, there will always be certain losses associated with it. And now I apply that over here. This essentially means that when the energy transfer happens from the first to the second trophic level, all the energy which the first trophic level has cannot be transferred to the second trophic level. Only a part will transfer to the second trophic level, and the rest of it will be lost as heat to the surroundings, as per the second law. Because whenever energy transfer happens, it can never be 100% efficient. Ab I second trophic level par. Now the total energy which the second trophic level has, all of it cannot be transferred to the third trophic level. Only a part of it will go to the third trophic level, and the rest of it will again be lost as heat to the surroundings. And then out of the total energy which the third trophic level has, a part of it goes to the fourth, the rest again will be lost as heat to the surroundings. And what I kept on saying, कि यार part will transfer and the rest will be lost, ये scientists ने empirically they tried to find that out. And they found out that in most of the cases, the energy transfers were happening as per the 10% rule. which essentially means that let's say the first trophic level has 100 units of energy. अब सारी एनर्जी तो जाएगी नहीं to the second trophic level. 10% rule कहता है कि 10% of the energy can go. So 10 units of energy are transferred to the second trophic level. The rest of it is lost. Then out of the 10 units, 1 unit reaches the third trophic level, and then subsequently 0.1 unit reaches the fourth trophic level. But this has some important implications. ये तो हम समझ गए कि हाँ 10% rule is applied over here and that's why energy is reducing. But as the energy is reducing at the higher trophic levels, this means that ecosystems will be able to support only some certain finite number of trophic levels. Ecosystems will not be able to support infinite number or too high number of trophic levels, because beyond a certain trophic level there may not be sufficient energy available for further transfer, क्योंकि energy तो 10% law के हिसाब से is being transferred, right? So as now we are going up, the amount of energy is successively reducing, and that's why ecosystems at best support 3 to 4 to 5 trophic levels. They don't support very high number of trophic levels, right? And second implication is with respect to the structures का जो हमने depiction किया है. बच्चे, this trophic structure is always shown like a tapered pyramid. Ever wondered why even in the school days no other geometrical shape was used by them? Never used a sphere, never used a cuboid, always a tapered pyramid, because this tapered pyramid shape, geometrical shape, is signifying that this energy transfer is operating as per the 10% rule. The higher trophic levels will have the lesser energy as compared to the lower trophic levels, right? लिखेंगे. The flow of energy in an ecosystem is governed by the two fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Two fundamental laws of thermodynamics, which implies that first point, solar energy is converted into chemical energy during photosynthesis, which is then transferred unidirectionally from the lower to the successively higher trophic level. Which is then transferred unidirectionally from the lower to the successively higher trophic level. Next point. The flow of energy is usually as per the 10% rule or the 10% law. The 10% rule or the 10% law, which means that only 10% of energy at a given trophic level is transferred to the next higher trophic level. Now in brackets write down in the same point. Therefore, ecosystems usually support Therefore, ecosystems usually support 3 to 5 trophic levels, 3 to 5 trophic levels under natural conditions. 3 to 5 trophic levels under natural conditions. The next is flow of nutrients. Now class, for life to exist, it requires energy, it requires nutrients. Some of the nutrients are needed in large quantities, we call them as macronutrients. Examples of macronutrients: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, all of them, they become examples of macronutrients. Some of them are needed in smaller quantities, we call them as micronutrients. Examples of micronutrients: copper, iron, zinc, iodine, manganese, molybdenum, all of them become examples of the micronutrients. Whatever be the nutrient, macro or micro, these nutrients are present in different forms in different reservoirs of the planet. By reservoirs, I mean storage houses of the planet, storage pools of the planet. And now these nutrients will keep on getting transferred from one reservoir to another reservoir. We try to understand with the help of an example, and I take example of carbon as a nutrient. Carbon is present in gaseous form in the atmosphere. So now atmosphere becomes one of the reservoirs of carbon. Some of the carbon is present in soils of the world as well in organic form, and soil is part of what? Lithosphere. So lithosphere becomes another reservoir of carbon. Carbon may be present in organic form, also in inorganic form in the oceans of the world, and oceans are part of hydrosphere. So hydrosphere is another reservoir of carbon, and some of the carbon is present in our bodies as well, and we are part of biosphere. So now these become the 4 reservoirs of the planet. All the nutrients, macro, micro, whatever it is, these nutrients will be available in different forms in different reservoirs of the planet. And now these nutrients, I said, will travel from one reservoir to another reservoir. The form will change, and that transfer from one to another reservoir is called as the flow of nutrients. We again try to understand with help of an example. Carbon is present, I said, as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. During the process of photosynthesis, this carbon from the atmosphere lands up in the plant's body. Has the reservoir changed? Definitely. From the atmosphere, now it is into biosphere, and plant is organic form. So the form has changed as well. Not just the reservoir, but the form changes. Now the plant grows. Carbon is locked up in the plant's body. Let's say plant has a fruit. Fruit is eaten by the bird. And now part of the carbon goes into another organism in the biosphere, that is bird. The bird does some droppings, excreta. And the excreta falls onto the ground, which now means that part of the carbon is entering where? It is entering into lithosphere. Bird's excreta falls onto the ground. So part of the carbon is now entering into lithosphere. Now in the organic form, carbon is into lithosphere through the bird's excreta. After some time, the plant dies and the bird dies. When the plant dies and the bird dies, their microbial decomposition will begin. And upon the microbial decomposition, which gases are released? Carbon dioxide, methane may be released depending upon aerobic chal raha hai ki anaerobic chal raha hai, right? So now these gases like carbon dioxide etc. are released upon decomposition, which means that this carbon started from atmosphere. For some time it was into biosphere. it was into lithosphere as well. Eventually the carbon is recycled again as carbon dioxide and entering back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, and it is this carbon dioxide which will be used in the future for photosynthesis again by the plants. So carbon will keep on getting cycled and recycled. Carbon from from one reservoir to another reservoir, it will keep on getting distributed and redistributed into different reservoirs of the planet. It will again be available in the reservoir from where it began, in the same form in which it began, and it will be used again. And that's why the process of flow of nutrients now becomes a cyclical process. The flow of energy was taking place in a unidirectional manner, but the flow of nutrients happens in a cyclical manner, and that is why the flow of nutrients is also called as biogeochemical cycling. I'll give you dictation in some time. I'll give you spellings as well. Abhi samajh rahe hain. So the flow of nutrients will be a cyclical process. Right. And now flow of nutrients, another way to understand this is through nitrogen. How is nitrogen present? Most of the nitrogen is present in the atmosphere in gaseous elemental form. And nitrogen is needed by the plants for the growth. But plants, they don't make use of this elemental nitrogen, this gaseous nitrogen. Plants require nitrates for their growth. Nitrates, nitrogen in the form of ions present in the soil. If plants require nitrates, it means there must be some mechanism in nature which is converting nitrogen into nitrates. Then only plants will be able to take them, right? So we for sure know that nitrogen fixation happens. Nitrogen fixation can happen in two ways. Nitrogen fixation can happen through atmospheric lightning. Padha tha humne school mein. And nitrogen fixation can also happen because of certain microbes which are present in the soil. Yaad hai aapko rhizobium? Present in the root nodules of the leguminous plants. So rhizobium जो है वो तो symbiotic relationship में है into the root nodules, but there are some free living bacteria as well which do nitrobacter करता है nitrogen fixation, which is a free living bacteria. So now nitrogen fixation will be done wherein nitrogen will be converted, can be done through different mechanisms, but nitrogen will be converted into nitrates. Now nitrates are present in the lithosphere. They remain in the lithosphere. Eventually they will be taken by the plants for their growth. When they are taken by the plants for their growth, now nitrogen is entering where? It is entering into biosphere. As the plants they grow, nitrogen is locked up in the plant's body, maybe locked up into other biotic components body as well, right? And eventually what will happen? Eventually the plant dies and now the decomposition starts. During the decomposition, there are some denitrifying bacteria present as well. There are some denitrifying bacteria present as well. Example of denitrifying bacteria in the ecosystems, Pseudomonas is an example. So this Pseudomonas now will convert these nitrates back into free nitrogen, which goes into the atmosphere. Once into the atmosphere, it may again be used by the plants for their growth. So nitrogen is distributed, redistributed, cycled, recycled, so as to be available again in the usable form by the biotic components. अब ये प्रोसेस भी साइक्लिकल प्रोसेस चल रहा है. कार्बन साइकिल भी साइक्लिकल प्रोसेस चला था. तो जो फ्लो ऑफ न्यूट्रिएंट्स है दैट विल बी अ साइक्लिकल प्रोसेस एंड फ्लो ऑफ एनर्जी विल रिमेन अ यूनिडायरेक्शनल प्रोसेस. लिखेंगे the nutrients are present in different forms across different reservoirs of the planet. Across different reservoirs of the planet. In brackets write down, that is atmosphere, lithosphere, biosphere and hydrosphere. Atmosphere, lithosphere, biosphere and hydrosphere, brackets close. The nutrients are transferred from one reservoir to another, so as to be available again in the reusable form. This is called as biogeochemical cycling of nutrients. Class, there are three biogeochemical cycles which you have to do for the prelims examination: carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus. These are the three biogeochemical cycles. I will not take up each of these cycles explicitly. The NCERT book I mentioned in the beginning has a discussion on all the three biogeochemical cycles. When I was talking about example of carbon, I was referring to certain links of carbon cycle. जब नाइट्रोजन की बात की थी तो कुछ links of नाइट्रोजन cycle, पूरा exhaustive मैंने आपके साथ नाइट्रोजन साइक्लिंग, कार्बन साइक्लिंग डिस्कस नहीं किया है, but certain links I have referred to. You can go through the book. One of the chapters, I think chapter 14, has a discussion on these biogeochemical cycles, right? Now do one thing, flip back your pages to where you have written down definition of an ecosystem. And we revisit the definition. What does it say? It's a functional unit. Now do you understand why do I call it as a functional unit? Because it performs two functions, the flow of energy and the flow of nutrients. So it's a functional unit composed of a biotic community. Biotic community का क्या मतलब रहता है? All the biotic components taken together, right? So comprises of biotic components integrated with its physical non-living environment. So physical non-living environment means the abiotic components. So the biotic ones are going to be linked to the abiotic ones. And how are they linked to the abiotic ones? Through the flow of energy and the flow of nutrients. Had the flow of energy and the flow of nutrients not happened, this ecosystem wouldn't have supported life. It becomes a life-sustaining entity, a self-supporting entity because of the presence of two functions, or because of two functions being performed, the flow of energy and the flow of nutrients, right? This is what an ecosystem is. Somebody over there had a doubt? Difference between environment and ecosystem. Beta, environment simply is our surroundings. When I talk of my surroundings, I am referring to the components, but nothing beyond that. That is, it has biotic, abiotic components. In environment, I am not interested in knowing the relationships. I am not interested in knowing the interlinkages. I am not interested in talking about life being supported or life not being supported. On this planet, my environment supports life. I go to some other planet, my environment will not support life, but I'll still have an environment, isn't it? I'll still have certain surroundings. When I say ecosystem, ecosystem now specifically means that it is an entity. Environment entity nahi hai. Environment to bas meri surrounding hai. Ecosystem is a functional unit. Environment कोई functional unit नहीं था. मैं इंटरेस्टेड नहीं हूं एनवायरमेंट कोई फंक्शन परफॉर्म कर रहा है या नहीं, सिर्फ मेरी सराउंडिंग. हाँ, फंक्शन परफॉर्म कर रहा है, ठीक है, वेरी गुड. नहीं कर रहा, कोई बात नहीं, मेरी सराउंडिंग है वो. But ecosystem now becomes a functional unit which comprises of the same components as the environment comprises, बच्चे, because we are on planet Earth. If I go to some other planet, my environment will still be there, but I will not find any ecosystem over there. राइट। तो इकोसिस्टम में अब क्या है, अब यहां पर हमारे बायोटिक कंपोनेंट्स हैं, इनके बीच में लिंकेजेस हैं, फंक्शंस परफॉर्म हो रहे हैं, वी हैव लर्न दोस फंक्शंस एंड नाउ लाइफ इज बीइंग सपोर्टेड। इफ दीज कंडीशंस आर मेट, नाउ दिस बिकम्स एन इकोसिस्टम। इट इज अ वे of looking at the same thing in over the planet Earth in two different ways. If I'm simply talking about, let's say, this is our closed environment. This is not an ecosystem, because for the ecosystem, अभी हमारा environment क्या है? हमारे पास we have got students, we have got a teacher, we have got some technical support, we have online class. This becomes our environment. But यहाँ पर ecosystem है क्या? नहीं, क्योंकि इकोसिस्टम होने के लिए तो लाइफ हैज टू बी सपोर्टेड इनडेफिनेटली, तो बच्चे उसके लिए भी डेफिनेटली रिक्वायर द फर्स्ट ट्रॉफिक लेवल। फर्स्ट ट्रॉफिक लेवल तो है, तो इकोसिस्टम तो नहीं है अभी हमारे एनवायरनमेंट में। आई होप यू आर एबल टू अप्रिशिएट द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द टू थिंग्स नाउ, राइट? एनीवन एल्स हैज अ डाउट? ऑलराइट, टेक योर नेक्स्ट हेडिंग, ecological productivity. Ecological productivity. Ecological productivity लिखेंगे, पहले लिखेंगे, then I'll explain. It is defined as rate of biomass production, by the biotic components of an ecosystem. By the biotic components of an ecosystem. It is of two types. Primary and secondary productivity. Primary and secondary productivity. Now write down. Primary productivity is defined as rate of biomass production by the producers of an ecosystem. It is usually expressed as grams per meter square in a year. Grams per meter square in a year. It is of two types. Gross primary productivity brackets में GPP, standard abbreviation, and net primary productivity, GPP and NPP. Gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. अब समझेंगे. Ecological productivity बच्चे is a concept associated with the biotic components, and there are two major types of biotic components, the producers and the consumers. So we have the ecological productivity of producers called as primary, of consumers called as secondary. We'll first discuss primary productivity. Now primary productivity is the rate of biomass production by the producers of an ecosystem. Biomass means body weight in ecology. In the subject of ecology, biomass is body weight. So there is a tree outside, it has certain body weight, that becomes tree's biomass. Our body weight becomes our biomass, right? And now we are saying biomass production. So let us understand biomass production. Imagine you have seed of a tree. You plant it. It germinates, grows into a small sapling. Some time goes by, the sapling grows into a small plant. Some more time goes by, that small plant has grown into a bigger plant. 4 or 5 decades pass by, and now there is a young tree which has come up. In this duration of 4 to 5 decades, that the seed was growing, the tree has grown. Don't you think its body weight has increased? That increase in the body weight which happened because of photosynthesis is called as biomass production. So biomass production is increase in body weight of a living organism. This is what biomass production is. And now we apply this concept of primary productivity for the entire ecosystem. अभी तो हमने एक plant लिया था. Now we apply this concept of productivity for the entire ecosystem. So imagine that somewhere there is a barren patch of land. You decide to carry out a forestation drive with your friends. All of you go over there and you plant the seeds of the trees. Plant the seeds of the trees. Now, like one seed had germinated, all these seeds they germinate. Some time goes by, the seeds they grow further into small plants. 4-5 decades beat gaye. Now there is a urban forest, a kind of ecosystem, small ecosystem, mini forest which has come up in your city. And why do I call it as an ecosystem? Because now life is supported. There are plants which are growing. Soil mein again there are insects which are proliferating. There are certain microorganisms over here. Kuch birds hain, kuch pollinators hain, bees hain, butterflies hain. Life support ho gayi. So now this becomes an example of a mini forest being a ecosystem. Right? अब यहाँ पर क्या है? Like there was biomass production happening for a single plant, now there is biomass production happening for all the plants. Now for this entire ecosystem, we understand or we calculate what is the biomass production in a year. So at the beginning of the year, we know what the weight of the plants was. At the end of the year, we know what the weight of the plant was. We subtract the beginning weight from the end weight, and that we get as the primary production. Increase in the weight of all the plants, increase in the biomass, increase in the body weight of all the producers of this primary production. यहाँ तक clear है आपको what is primary production? Now primary productivity by definition rate यहाँ पर का meaning है per unit area. Primary productivity means primary production divided by area of that ecosystem. Area of that ecosystem. So per unit area of that ecosystem, how much of primary production is happening, that is primary productivity. And then we express it like what? How do we measure biomass? Through grams. Therefore, primary productivity will be expressed as how many grams are added in a year per unit area of that ecosystem. This is what is meant by primary productivity. Now this primary productivity, I say again, is of two types. It could be GPP, it could be NPP. And to understand the difference between GPP and NPP, we take example of a human body. Let's say बच्चे, there is a child and the child eats food. Food is metabolized in the body. Energy is released. Some of this energy will be used by the child for own body functions, right? खेलना कूदना, माँ बाप के नाक में दम करना. Some of the energy will be used by the child for own body functions. Some of the energy may also be lost from the child's body as heat losses. So when the sweat evaporates from the body, what happens? Latent heat of evaporation is lost from the body. Let's say the child had taken in 100 calories of food. 100 calories were released upon metabolism of the food in the child's body. Out of 100 calories, let's say 40 calories are either used by the child or they are lost as heat from the child's body. How much energy is the child's body left with? 60 calories. It is those 60 calories which are now being used by the child for its own biomass production. So when the tissue growth happens, when the bone growth happens, when the child grows from an infant into a teenager, into an adult, into a mature human being, that growth of the biomass which takes place is because of the leftover energy. In our example, how much was the residual or the leftover? The 60 calories. Now something similar will happen for the plants as well. How it happens for plants is that the plants are going to take up some total energy from sun. What they take up some total from the sun, that's their gross. Acha, when they take up that energy, some energy will be used by the plants for their own body function. उनके क्या body function है या respiration तो वो भी करेंगे. Heat losses तो उनकी body से भी रहते हैं. Heard of evapotranspiration losses? So during transpiration losses, when the water evaporates, plants have a mechanism. Like we have to thermoregulate our body at a specific temperature, plants also have a mechanism to cool themselves down. Right? So during that evapotranspiration losses, there are transpiration losses from the plant's body, heat losses from the plant's body. So let's say 100 units of energy plant had captured from sun. वो तो रहा plant का total, gross. Out of the 100 unit, plant ने 40 calorie या तो use किया for respiration, या फिर it is lost by the plant during heat losses. Now plant is left with 60. That 60 will be used by the plant for its own tissue growth. So when the cellular growth happens of the plant, that happens because of the leftover of the 60 units of energy. The rate at which the total is captured, that becomes gross. The rate at which the leftover is used for the plant growth, that is called as net. This is the difference between GPP and NPP. लिखेंगे. The rate at which total solar energy is captured by the plants during photosynthesis is called as gross primary productivity. Next para. While the energy capture is taking place, some part of the energy will be used by the plants for their own body functions. In brackets write down, or can be lost as heat from the plant's body, brackets close. The rate at which residual energy is used by the plant for its biomass production is called as net primary productivity. Therefore, NPP is equal, look up the board, NPP is equal to GPP minus respiration losses. NPP is equal to GPP minus respiration losses. GPP minus respiration losses. NPP is the residual energy, GPP the total energy captured, and the energy either used or lost is called as respiration losses. Sorry, you don't understand? No, energy which has been used by the producer during respiration process is what we are referring to, right? Used for respiration. And जो आप रेसिडुअल ना कह रहे हो यूज, वो तो प्लांट ग्रोथ के लिए यूज हुआ है, वो किस लिए वो भी यूज किया उसने अपने बायोमास प्रोडक्शन के लिए, और यहां पर यूज रेफर्स टू रेस्पिरेशन प्रोसेस, राइट? ओके, नाउ क्लास different ecosystems have got different primary productivities. We try to understand by taking examples of two ecosystems over here. One tropical rainforest of Brazil, another Sahara Desert of Africa. We go to tropical rainforest, lush green forest, dense forest over there, huge trees, big canopy cover at the top. And then Sahara Desert, a few plants, widely spaced from one another, short in height as compared to the huge trees of Brazilian rainforest. Now when we compare the two, what do you think? Their primary productivity is same or different? Different है. कहाँ पर ज़्यादा होगी? Tropical rainforest, isn't it? Because how is primary productivity visible to us? In the form of vegetative growth happening, and vegetative growth for sure is much more in the tropical rainforest, right? So tropical rainforest has higher primary productivity as compared to Sahara Desert of Africa. And now this brings us to the conclusion that different ecosystems have different primary productivity, right? Abhi to I took the example of just two ecosystems over the planet and they have got different primary productivity. Think of multiple ecosystems over the planet, they all have their primary productivity different, right? And now this means that there must be certain environmental controls, there must be certain factors of the environment which try to determine the primary productivity of the ecosystems. Because these ecosystems we for sure know are found in different environmental setups. So now the ecologists became interested in knowing that what are those environmental factors which try to control the primary productivity of ecosystems. लिखेंगे environmental factors. Soumya online entire ecosystem लिखेंगे environmental factors which control primary productivity of ecosystems are temperature, water availability and nutrient availability. Temperature, water availability and nutrient availability. Water availability and nutrient availability. Now over to me again. Class, the primary productivity is found to be positively correlated with these factors, which basically means that if the temperatures are warm, the primary productivity will be high. If there is more of water and nutrient availability, the primary productivity will be high again. So if there is a direct correlation, I have a question. But out of the two ecosystems which I tell you, आप मुझे बताइएगा which one will have higher primary productivity? मतलब सवाल तो पूरा करने दो. The ecosystems which are found in low latitudes or the ecosystems which are found in high latitudes? Because we know as the latitude increases, the temperature reduces. Again, let's say there is an ecosystem at the low altitude, another ecosystem at the high altitude. The low altitude, because we know as the height increases, the temperature again reduces, right? But please keep in mind, my examples over here or my questions over here with respect to the temperature does not mean that temperature will have some overbearing influence in determining the primary productivity. कि temperature सबसे important factor नहीं. All the factors in the environment are acting simultaneously. All the factors will have an important role to play. अगर temperature का इतना ही important role होता, had it been so important, don't you think Sahara Desert of Africa would have had very high primary productivity as well? Because Sahara Desert is a hot desert of the world. Temperatures over there are 40-45 degree Celsius. उसके comparison में if I think of Brazilian rainforest, वहां पर तो temperatures are around 25-27 degree Celsius. But what becomes a limiting factor in case of a Sahara Desert? Less precipitation over there, and therefore scarcity of soil moisture becomes a limiting factor for Sahara Desert. लिखेंगे the primary productivity of ecosystems. The primary productivity of ecosystems is positively correlated with the above mentioned factors. Is positively correlated with the above mentioned factors and is determined by complex interplay amongst all the factors which are acting simultaneously. Now write down secondary productivity. Next para mein, secondary productivity is defined as rate of biomass production by the consumers of an ecosystem. Now understand, class? So in secondary productivity, we consider all the consumers. Consumers at the second trophic level, at the third, at the fourth trophic level. Their biomass at the beginning of the year and their biomass at the end of the year gives us biomass production by the consumers in a year. When we take out the difference between the two, that gives us biomass production by the consumers in a year. And now for all these consumers, we divide the biomass production done by them, so that becomes the secondary production. We divide that with the area of the ecosystem. वही हमारा जो forest है, तो area तो primary production, secondary production दोनों में एक ही रहा. This gives us the secondary productivity. But class, out of the two concepts of primary and secondary productivity आपने theoretically जान लिया क्या है. It will not have much of a practical significance. Primary productivity has a more practical significance because all the other organisms of the ecosystem will be directly, indirectly dependent upon the primary producers for the source of food, for the source of energy. So ultimately it is the primary productivity which becomes the basis of energy, which becomes the basis of food for rest of the organisms in an ecosystem as well, right? इसीलिए जो ecologists थे, they got in depth into the study of primary productivity. They tried to find out the environmental factors controlling the primary productivity. What is the value of primary productivity for different ecosystems? That was also calculated by them through experimentation. हम statistical part में नहीं जाएंगे. हमने conceptually समझा that there are certain factors like temperature, water, nutrient availability, etc., which determine the primary productivity of ecosystems, right? But ultimately, interplay between all of them So when we take up biomes, in one of the lectures I'll discuss with you biomes of the world. Over there you will understand how the interplay between all of them ultimately will determine the primary productivity of the ecosystems, right? Take your next heading, class. Biodiversity. लिखेंगे, it is defined as totality of genes, species and ecosystems over the planet. Totality of genes, species and ecosystems over the planet. Now we break up this term, biodiversity. Bio refers to biological, diversity refers to variety. So the variety of life over the planet, that is biodiversity. And class, we for sure know that our planet supports tremendous variety of life. From the microorganisms to the largest of whales over the planet. From the terrestrial to the aquatic life over the planet, our planet has supported tremendous variety of life, and all that variety of life is called as the biodiversity of Earth. लेकिन अब UN ने बोला, United Nations said that this biodiversity, when you say variety of life, life can occur at different levels. Life can occur at the level of genes, at the level of species, also at the level of ecosystems. ये ऑनलाइन वाले इतने मासूम सवाल क्यों पूछते हैं? What is ES? क्या हो सकता है ES? So UN says that this life could be existing at different levels. At the level of genes, at the level of species and at the level of ecosystems. And therefore, biodiversity now is sum total of all of them, and it is of three types now. We have three types of biodiversity over the planet. लिखिए. Therefore, it's of three types. Therefore, it is of three types. First, genetic diversity. First is genetic diversity. Write down, genetic diversity is defined as sum total of genes within the individuals of a same species. Within the individuals of a same species. Now class, genetic diversity, we take any species. Let's say we take humans as a species. And now we take the entire population of humans, that is 8 billion individuals of our species. From one individual to another, the gene makeup changes, right? And now the entire gene pool in all the 8 billion individuals of our species makes up our genetic diversity. Now change the species. Let's say tiger. From one tiger to another, the gene makeup changes. That's why every tiger will have a unique pattern of stripes. Like we have a unique pattern of fingerprints, they have a unique pattern of stripes. Now for all the 3,500, 4,000 tigers over the planet, the entire gene pool in all these tigers over the planet, the entire gene stock of all these tigers of the planet makes up their genetic diversity. I have a question. There are two cases. In one case, species has got lesser genetic diversity. In another case, species has got a higher genetic diversity? In which of the two cases do you think the species has better chances of survival? Why? What does the gene stock provide us? The gene pool, every gene provides some kind of characteristic feature to the species. It could be tolerance to heat, it could be resistance against a disease or something, right? So every gene is able to provide a characteristic feature to the species. Let's say in one of the cases, the gene pool is big and the gene pool, a vast gene pool, this is the gene pool for a species. In another case, the gene pool is a smaller gene pool. This is the gene pool, let's say, for a species, a limited gene pool. Now, we for sure know that every gene is going to provide a characteristic feature to the species, right? What happens, class, is that as long as the environmental conditions remain the same, they remain normal, even the species with a limited gene pool will be able to survive. Stresses start to occur for a species or challenges start to occur for a species now if there is a new environmental threat coming onto the picture. For example, for our species, the COVID pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic was an example of a new stress occurring for the Homo sapiens. अब क्या होगा when a new stress is occurring in form of heat stresses, in form of temperature stresses, in form of disease attack, pest attack, weed attack, etc. The species which has got a higher gene pool, there are more chances that one of the genes is able to cope up with a new stress, but the chances that some of the gene is able to cope up, the chances are very, very limited over here because of the limited gene pool. The chances are higher over here because of a diverse gene pool. अब हमारी कंट्री में ना, this is now in news nowadays, the genetic diversity for the species, certain species is being talked about. I'll tell you in what context. All of you know that we over here in India have Project Tiger for tiger conservation. And Project Tiger is one of these successful attempts in biodiversity conservation in our country because the population of the tigers has risen over the years. So that's why the government claims that Project Tiger has been successful. Poaching, hunting, to a large extent it has been controlled. Protected areas बनाए हैं tigers के लिए, तो population definitely has improved. But bache, if we think of the genetic diversity of the tigers of our country, now the ecologists and the conservationists, they tell us that the genetic diversity of Indian tiger population is becoming limited. And this genetic diversity becomes limited because if we think of the protected areas and form tiger reserves, पता है बेटा आपको? For Project Tiger, under Project Tiger we have tiger reserves for tiger conservation. So tiger reserve में क्या करते हैं ना? The boundary is demarcated. Now this becomes a tiger reserve. Now the human activities will be controlled over here, will be regulated, right? Now these tiger reserves of our country, they have become highly fragmented as the population density has increased and lot of urbanization and land is being consumed for lot of other human activities. So this now means that all this area now becomes habited by humans. Let's say there is an industry or there is agriculture or there are settlements which are coming up, and these tiger reserves now, they have become islands. They have become fragmented. They are not connected to one another, but they have become separated from one another. When there is this kind of habitat fragmentation which is happening with little connectivity between the tiger reserves, now all the adult tigers of one tiger reserve will keep on mating amongst themselves. Consequently, the genetic diversity starts to fall. अच्छा, ऐसा भी नहीं है कि पूरे इंडिया में genetic diversity कम है. Because बच्चे, अगर हम सेंट्रल इंडिया के लैंडस्केप की बात करें, वहां पर द हैबिटेट हैज बिकम हाईली फ्रैगमेंटेड. वेस्टर्न घाट्स में हैबिटेट फिर भी इज कनेक्टेड टू ईच अदर. Western Ghats are more protected as compared to Central Indian landscape. So Western Ghats, the habitat is still connected. And that is why, in order to provide connectivity between the tiger reserves, have you heard of something called as wildlife corridors? So now wildlife corridors become essential in order to improve the connectivity between fragmented tiger reserves, such that there could be movement of the tigers from one tiger reserve to another tiger reserve, so that mating can happen between different tigers. That genetic diversity will only increase when the mating happens across the tigers from different tiger reserves, right? So that's about genetic diversity of India's tigers. अब यही challenge है for Asiatic lion conservation as well, right? हाँ, this boy at the last, यही जो आप अभी बहुत खुश थे. Yeah. Any special reason for your amusement? बैठे रहो. Any special reason for your amusement? Carry a certain maturity level to this classroom बच्चे. उसके बिना यहाँ आओगे ना तो 9th-10th के ऊपर की बातों के ऊपर उठ नहीं पाओगे और फिर ऐसे ही amused रहोगे. तो अगर आपको लगता है ना what goes on in your mind is not understandable by the others, I am a no nonsense person. I take zero nonsense. I have a zero tolerance for nonsense. Let me make it clear to you. एडिटोरियल्स यही बात करते हैं, नहीं समझ आएगा, क्वेश्चन आ गया, ये हंसाना, अगले साल पेपर में भी हंसाना. आप लोग न्यूज़पेपर्स कब से, सिंस व्हेन आर यू रीडिंग द न्यूज़पेपर्स? और कौन सा न्यूज़पेपर पढ़ रहे हैं आप? बॉय एट द लास्ट, सिंस व्हेन आर यू रीडिंग द न्यूज़पेपर रेगुलरली? 3 days? 15 days? Which one? The Indian Express. चलो बताओ मुझे, what are the issues related to the feedstock of cattle in our country? हो गए ना 15 दिन, बताओ मुझे, what are the issues related to feedstock of cattle in our country right now? Increment in prices, why? क्या हो गया फॉडर को? रैपिड चेंजेस इन वेदर, तो क्या हो गया चारे को? रैपिड चेंजेस इन वेदर की वजह से. वेदर इज ऑलवेज चेंजिंग. वेदर इज ऑलवेज चेंजिंग. वेदर चेंजेस फ्रॉम मिनट टू मिनट. अनटाइमली चेंज ऑफ farmers are not able to protect fodder for their cattle. क्या पढ़ा है तुमने? 15 दिन से पढ़ रहे हो ना इंडियन एक्सप्रेस. आईई कवर कर रहा है ये इन डेप्थ में. क्या पढ़ा है तुमने? इफ यू आर नॉट एबल टू टेल मी द इश्यू रिलेटेड टू द फीड स्टॉक ऑफ द कैटल फॉडर, तो क्या पढ़ा बच्चे आपने? Do you understand the meaning of reading through? It means assimilation, understanding. It means using the right terminology. Weather and climate में difference तो हम एक स्कूल में पढ़ा देते हैं. We understand the difference between weather and climate. When you say too much changes in weather or untimely changes in weather, बेटे weather तो हमेशा change होता रहता है. What should have you used instead? Ma'am, because of climate change, there were heat stresses faced by the wheat crop in the beginning of the year, which has led to the scarcity of fodder stock for the cattle, such that the price rise is happening right now, which will further be experienced as food inflation in the country. अगर तुम ये नहीं बोल पा रहे हो, if you are not able to articulate what you are reading this way, then it's useless. All right. बच्चे आपको समझ आया wildlife corridors and the significance of wildlife corridors in India? Yes. All right. Now the next is species diversity. लिखेंगे species diversity has two components. Species diversity has two components. species richness and species evenness. Species richness and species evenness. Species richness is defined as number of species per unit area in a region. Number of species per unit area in a region. Species evenness is defined as relative abundance of individuals of different species per unit area in a region. Per unit area in a region. Now understand, class. Now species diversity will comprise two things, richness and evenness, and we try to understand with help of example region X and region Y. These are two different regions. I take per unit area of both of them. And A, B, C, D are the species. How many species are there in region X? 4 of them. How many in region Y? 4 of them again. So now the species richness of region X is 4 and the species richness of region Y is 4, because species richness is simply how many different species are present in a region. That's all. But if you look at the distribution of the individuals of the species, do you find some difference across region X and region Y? What do we find? We find कि यार region X में तो there are 4 individuals of A, 4 of B, 4 of C and 4 of D. And region Y में क्या चल रहा है? Region Y में there are 2 individuals of D, 1 each of B and C, and the rest of the entire area is dominated by species A. So now we say that as far as richness is concerned, both have equal richness, but when it comes to evenness, the species are more evenly or more uniformly distributed across region X, and they are unevenly distributed across region Y. Ecologists, they said, do not go into calculation of ratio and proportion. हमें यहाँ कुछ mathematically ratio proportion नहीं calculate करना है. We simply go into, we simply have a simple rule over here. What do we do is, let's say I just casually walk across region X. I walk like this, I walk like this, I walk like this. When I'm just casually walking across region X, don't you think my chances of encountering A, B, C, D are equal? Because they are evenly distributed. Now, if I just casually walk across region Y, which species will I encounter more? A. If this is the case, what do we conclude is that species evenness of region X is more than that of region Y, and the species richness of region X is same as that of region Y. But for species diversity, please keep in mind that diversity has both the components. Probably अभी तक आपने समझा था diversity, species diversity simply means richness. No, it means richness, it means evenness as well. So now if I have to conclude about species diversity, I conclude that species diversity of region X is more than that of region Y, because richness में तो उनमें tie हो गया, but evenness में who wins? X wins. So the species diversity of X is more than that of region Y, right? This is about species diversity. The next one is, actually, you want to take down the example.
I didn't get evenness exactly. Like, is it you're taking every species differently or together?
We will take every species differently, but we are looking at how their population is distributed across a region. We will take A, B, C, D, all of them. But now when we look at the distribution of population of A, B, C, D, what do we find in region Y? In region Y, we find that they are very unevenly distributed, right? अच्छा, ये hypothetical example है, may not be present in real life. This is for the sake of simplicity. This is for the sake of understanding. हाँ, लेकिन in the next lecture, I'll discuss with you something called as invasive alien species. When invasive alien species enter an ecosystem, this may start to happen. So if this is happening in an ecosystem, it is an indicator that biodiversity loss has started to take place in that ecosystem, right? The next is ecosystem diversity or community diversity. It is also called as community diversity. Ecosystem diversity or community diversity is defined as ecosystem diversity or community diversity is defined as variety of ecosystems in a region. Variety of ecosystems in a region. Now understand, class. Bache, this is the simplest to understand. Region could be any. Let's say I take India as a region. I'm studying countries of the world. I take India as a region. And now in India, there is this great diversity of ecosystems which is present. Tropical evergreen forest, tropical deciduous forest, mangroves of the coastal areas. We have got coral islands as well. We have got temperate deciduous forest as well. So now all these ecosystems of India, they make up ecosystem diversity of our country. Usually ecosystem diversity, community diversity, this is the concept which is used at the level of entire earth. क्योंकि हमारे अर्थ में there are different varieties of ecosystems which are present. We study their distribution in the form of biomes. तो जो वेराइटी ऑफ इकोसिस्टम या जो प्लैनेट का इकोसिस्टम डाइवर्सिटी है बच्चे, we'll take that up separately when we take up biomes, right? So your takeaway is that diversity is of three types: genetic, species, ecosystem. And species diversity is not just richness, species diversity is also evenness. I have a question. Earlier we discussed that there are certain factors which control the primary productivity, right? And you told me ki ma'am, the ecosystems which are at low latitude and which are at low altitude will have more primary productivity, higher primary productivity compared to the ones which are at higher altitude and latitude. Now my question is, there are two ecosystems. One of them has a low primary productivity, another has a high primary productivity. Which one will support more biodiversity? Why?
Because it will support more organisms, more life.
Yes. What is primary productivity doing? Primary productivity now becomes the source of food, now becomes the basis of survival for rest of the other organisms as well. So if the primary productivity of the ecosystem is high, that ecosystem will support lot of other organisms at a higher trophic level and more of their population at the higher trophic level as well, right? So primary productivity then determines biodiversity as well, and there is a positive correlation between primary productivity and biodiversity. लिखेंगे examples of certain ecosystems. Examples of certain ecosystems which have high primary productivity and therefore have high biodiversity are? Therefore have high biodiversity are. Please take down the list. This is not descending order. This is no order. This is just serial numbering. Tropical rainforest, mangroves, coral reefs and wetlands. Now these ones become some of the most important ecosystems of the planet because they have got very high biodiversity. Biologically, these are one of the most diverse ecosystems of the planet, and that's why significant ecosystems of the planet. Newspapers may repeatedly talk about them. I will discuss these in detail in subsequent lectures, but just to make you familiar with the terms today, so that if the newspapers are discussing them, you have some sense of familiarity. Tropical rainforest. These are found in the latitudinal range 0 to 10 degrees north and south of the equator. That is, these are found in equatorial latitudes of the planet. हमने डिस्कस किया था low latitudes will have higher primary productivity. What could be the lowest possible latitude here? Equator itself, right? So the forests which are found at the equatorial latitudes 0 to 10 degrees north and south, tropical rainforest, very high primary productivity. Mangroves. Mangroves are the forests which are found in coastal regions. Forests which are found in coastal regions. Latitudinal range 30 degrees north and south of the equator. Latitudinal range 30 degrees north and south of the equator. Do you know about Sundarbans of India? Yes, Sundarbans of Bangladesh and India, they are the largest mangrove forest of the world, right? So they are found in the coastal regions. Again, low latitudes mein hai bache, tropical, subtropical latitudes, and they are again having very high biodiversity. Coral reefs. Heard of Great Barrier Reef? It is the largest coral reef ecosystem of the world. So coral reefs, again, they are found in, they are marine ecosystems. So they are found in oceans. They are marine ecosystems. Latitudinal range, again, 30 degrees north and south of the equator. Latitudinal range 30 degrees north and south of the equator. The next is wetlands. Now, wetlands are going to be the waterlogged areas. They are going to be the low-lying areas. The waterlogged areas, that is, water will be at the surface level. And in these wetlands, some plants will be growing as well. In these wetlands, some plants will be growing as well. So wetlands are those low-lying areas which are either partially saturated with water, that is for some part of the year, so temporarily they are saturated with water, or permanently they are saturated with water. We will discuss wetlands in detail in another lecture. For the time being, let me just give you certain examples of the wetlands. Have you heard of a lake in Manipur called as Loktak Lake? It's a freshwater lake of our country. आपने चिलिका लेक का नाम भी सुना होगा from Odisha. It's a brackish water lake of our country. Those of you from Kashmir, बच्चे Vular Lake on River Jhelum. It's an oxbow lake. Vular Lake on River Jhelum is an oxbow lake. It's again a wetland of our country. Vembanad Lake of Kerala, Renuka Lake of Himachal, Sambhar Lake of Rajasthan, Lonar Lake of Maharashtra. All these are the examples of wetlands of our country. Acha, even mangroves are wetlands. Every mangrove is going to be a wetland. Now let me tell you, how are mangroves wetlands? I said mangroves are found over the coastal areas. Mangroves are found in the intertidal zone. Mangroves are found in the intertidal zone. Intertidal zone is the zone between high tide level and low tide level. So because of the gravitational pull of sun and moon, water will have fluctuations. If this is the mean sea level, Sometimes the water level will be higher to the mean sea level, we call it as high tide level. Sometimes the water level will be lesser than the mean sea level, we call it as low tide level. This zone is called as the intertidal zone. Mangroves are found over here, right, in the intertidal zone, between the high tide level and the low tide level. Consequently, what happens is, मैंने क्या बताया था wetland? It may be either permanently saturated with water or it may be temporarily saturated with water. तो ये जो zone बनता है intertidal zone, this remains temporarily saturated with water. During the high tide level, it remains saturated with water. So the soils, they become completely saturated with water. There are plants growing over there. So the conditions of the wetlands are met. So all the mangroves are wetlands, but all the wetlands are not mangroves. Difference क्या रहता है? Wetlands lakes भी हो सकते हैं, जैसे लोकटाक लेक बताया, वुलार लेक बताया. ये mangrove forest नहीं है. These are not mangrove forest, but they are wetlands, right? But mangroves are wetlands as well.
All lakes are also.
All lakes are not wetlands. I'll tell you what wetlands are. हर लेक वेटलैंड नहीं होगा. अगर आपने शंकर पढ़ी है तो शंकर में बहुत ही बेकार सा डिफरेंस दिया हुआ है. लेक्स आर डीपर, वेटलैंड्स आर शैलोअर. ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता है. देयर इज अ टेक्निकल डिफरेंस बिटवीन अ लेक एंड अ वेटलैंड. बट आई विल टेल यू व्हाट वेटलैंड्स आर, तब समझेंगे कि वेटलैंड अपने आप में बिकम्स अ यूनिक इकोसिस्टम, राइट?
Can salty water be difference between them?
कैन
Salty water, like in mangroves, it's always near a.
हाँ, ब्रैकिश रहता है पानी.
Then what about wetlands which are found in lakes?
They may be fresh water, they may be brackish water, they may be salt water. सांभर लेक salt water है, चिलिका लेक brackish water है, वुलार लेक, लोकटाक लेक fresh water है. वाटर कुछ भी हो, वाटर का सॉल्ट कंटेंट कुछ भी रहे, लेकिन वेटलैंड वाटर के सॉल्ट कंटेंट पे नहीं डिपेंड करता. इट हैज टू बी ईदर परमानेंटली सैचुरेटेड और टेम्पररीली सैचुरेटेड विद वाटर.
Which of these ecosystems will have the highest biodiversity?
They are comparable. He asks me, ma'am, which of these ecosystems will have highest biodiversity? They're almost comparable to each other. It is very difficult to tell definitively which of these will have highest biodiversity. And if your question is based on one of the past year's questions wherein the examiner asked you in descending order of the ecosystems and their primary productivity, यही सवाल था ना बच्चे? क्वेश्चन ले आना, एलिमिनेशन से सॉल्व होता है वो सवाल. आई टेल यू द ट्रिक टू सॉल्व दैट क्वेश्चन. उसमें ये जानने की जरूरत ही नहीं थी. उसमें बस एक चीज जानने की जरूरत है कि ओशंस हैव मिनिमम प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी. बिकॉज प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी क्या बताया मैंने? प्राइमरी प्रोडक्शन डिवाइडेड बाय एरिया. ओशंस का एरिया इतना ह्यूज हो जाता है that oceans over the earth amongst all the ecosystems have a very, very low primary productivity. You understand the reason? Because denominator is too big for oceans, right? तो बच्चे ओशन का प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिव, अब उसमें क्या रहेगा? वो वाला ऑप्शन जहां ओशन लास्ट में आ रहा है, वो दो ऑप्शन बनते हैं. वो दो ऑप्शन पहले तो हम वो निकाल लेते हैं. उसके बाद हम अगर उसके बाकी तीन ऑप्शंस देखें ना, तो वो एलिमिनेशन से दैट क्वेश्चन इज सॉल्व्ड.
Or tropical rainforests will have higher.
ये क्वेश्चन यूपीएससी ने नहीं पूछा था. आई थिंक सीडीएस के सवाल में था.
No, I've seen the question.
हाँ, मतलब यूपीएससी ने सीडीएस में पूछा था, सीएससी में नहीं पूछा. जितना मुझे याद आ रहा है बेटा, ये सवाल मुझसे किसी स्टूडेंट ने पूछा हुआ है. उसका टेस्ट था, आफ्टर द टेस्ट वो नेक्स्ट डे आया, मैम इसका क्या आंसर है? कोरल रीफ और क्या बताया आपने? ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट. तो ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट लिखेंगे. Because coral reefs are also called as tropical rainforest of the oceans. The tropical rainforest have more, क्योंकि coral reef ना area wise बहुत small हो जाते हैं. Tropical rainforest area wise थोड़े bigger रहते हैं, तो ज़्यादा biodiversity they are able to support, right? अच्छा, अब raise down your pens for a while and pay attention. What happened, class? That after the industrial revolution began, human pressures over the natural environment increased tremendously. And why do I say that industrial revolution was kind of a watershed moment? Because after industrial revolution, our population increased, and human population has been growing. For some part of time, human population grew, at an exponential rate. So our population increased, and along with that, our production and consumption patterns changed fundamentally as well. We started to produce a lot more and we started to consume a lot more after the Industrial Revolution. And therefore, the pressure we were putting on the natural ecosystems and the natural environment, they increased. Our pressures on the natural environment can be broadly of two types. One is that we require resources like land, water, fossil fuels, minerals, etc. Every activity of humans will require land. As our populations were growing, we wanted to do more agriculture, so we cut down the forest. Wanted to have bigger settlements, so we cut down the forest as well. We needed more of fossil fuels, so a lot of mining had to be done. We required more minerals for our industry, again mining had to be done, right? So we are dependent on the ecosystems, on the natural environment now in two ways. One is that we derive resources from the natural environment, and the second is every activity of humans will produce some waste. हमारे सेटलमेंट्स में से सॉलिड वेस्ट जनरेट होगा, सीवेज जनरेट होगा, हमारी इंडस्ट्री एफ्लुएंट जनरेट करेगी, हमारे थर्मल पावर प्लांट्स दे विल जनरेट एयर पोल्यूटेंट्स, हम माइनिंग करेंगे तो भी कुछ सॉइल पोल्यूशन होगा, वाटर पोल्यूशन होगा. सो एवरी एक्टिविटी ऑफ ह्यूमंस विल जनरेट सम वेस्ट. And because of lot of waste entering into the ecosystems and because of ecosystems now getting diverted for human activities, जैसे forest cut down हुआ, right? Ecosystems getting diverted for human activities, the pressure on the ecosystems increased and consequently the health of the ecosystem started to deteriorate. The health of the ecosystems was negatively affected. With the health getting negatively affected, the primary productivity started to reduce. Right? Because now the functions which were performed by them, there were disruptions in certain functions. So the primary productivity started to reduce. And this is called as ecological degradation. So now we witness large scale ecological degradation. Examples of ecological degradation: deforestation, forest degradation. Bache, me without discussing climate change in depth with you, I hope you know that after climate change, now there are more of forest fires which are raging. And when forest fires they become very catastrophic, क्या होगा? जंगल जलेगा, वो जो decline in productivity है, that will be called as forest degradation. It is not a deforestation. Nobody is cutting down the forest, but there is decline in the productivity. We call it as forest degradation. Think of our oceans. आपको पता होगा about the extent of plastic pollution in our oceans. Have you heard something called as microplastics? What are microplastics? Fibers. Very small, very tiny, right? It is the plastic debris having diameter size less than 5 micrometer. So the oceans now presently, they have lot of pollution in form of microplastics, also macroplastics, not just micro but dono hai oceans mein. Think of our rivers. Our agriculture runoff goes into our rivers. Our chemicals from the industry, so industrial effluents go, our sewage goes into the, so rivers become polluted, wetlands become polluted, forests are undergoing degradation, forests are being cut down. All these are examples of ecological degradation taking place over the planet. And bache, this environment as a global common belongs to everybody. So United Nations now wanted to divert the attention of the countries towards this large scale ecological degradation, because ultimately human well-being is dependent upon the health of the ecosystems. I mean, we cannot be healthy if we have polluted soils, if we have polluted water, if we have polluted air. तो फिर क्या होगा? फिर बच्चे हमारे बजट में budgetary allocations होंगे for programs like Namami Gange, for programs like biodiversity conservation. Right? Why do we have budgetary allocations for these programs? Ultimately, though, ये burden है ना on the exchequer. क्यों है ये burden on the exchequer? Because environment, we know that if environment is severely polluted, अगर water polluted है बच्चे, burden of infant mortality will go very, very high in the country. If IMR rates are very, very high in the country, don't you think it's a parameter of the human development levels of a country? Right? So now the government understands that, the UN understands that. तो UN ने बोला कि यार the attention of the countries needs to be diverted towards this common cause. And whenever UN wants to declare or wants to have the attention of the countries, it may declare a given decade or a given year on a theme. जैसे अभी आपको पता होगा year of millets है, right? तो अब UN ने क्या किया? ये जो entire decade था, they declared it on the theme of ecological restoration. That the ecosystems, they need to be protected well, they need to be conserved well, and they called it as the decade for ecosystem restoration. And now this becomes part of current affairs. अभी तक मैंने जो पढ़ाया, that was static part. But now if the newspapers start talking about ecosystem restoration in some way, because UN has declared this decade, then you know that this is the current affairs part of the syllabus. So the silo-like separation between the current affairs and the static part is not possible. जो हम static में पढ़ेंगे, in that context when developments happen in the present times, that becomes part of our syllabus as well. Right now. After industrial revolution, as the human ecological footprint increased exponentially, therefore there has been large scale ecological degradation across the planet. Large scale ecological degradation across the planet. Ecological degradation is defined as disruptions in functioning of ecosystems, with decline in their primary productivity. Since human well-being is intricately linked to or closely linked to the health of ecosystems, therefore UN has declared 2021 to 2030 as the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. Next para. Ecosystem restoration is defined as preventing, halting and reversing. Please underline preventing, halting and reversing. Preventing, halting and reversing ecological degradation. Now class, this is the definition given by UN, and examiner often asks you definition based questions. So in the prelims possibly there could be a question, which of the following are the components of ecosystem restoration? And now they'll give you 5-6 options. All of them look possibly the answers. Protection, conservation of the ecosystems, increasing the primary productivity of the ecosystems, all of them along with preventing, halting, reversing. So बच्चे, when the definition is provided to us by UN, you must very precisely know what are the components of that definition. तो अब ये जो 6 options which all of them look to be plausible answers, उसमें आपको पता होना चाहिए that 3 components बताए हैं UN ने. Do not let it happen, that's preventing. It has started, stop it over there, that's halting. And undo the damage, bring it back to normalcy, that's reversing. Right? These are the 3 components of ecosystem restoration. That's all for the day. Thank you. Have a good day.